Hello and welcome to the channel again. This is Sam trying to spin to win on Zwift. In today's edition of Zwift Fight Club, we'll bring you not one, but two bouts for your viewing pleasure. The first will be an epic climbing ding-dong between my team, Swedish Zwifters Bifrost, and the Coalition S-Wings. The Coalition S-Wings clearly like pain because they chose the Surrey Hills course for this club ladder match. Not the whole course, of course, but there's still around 500 meters of climbing in this one, so it should be a real doozy. The second match will be between Swedish Zwifters Bifrost again and the Vikings Valgrind. This will take place on the Mayan Remo course. The course I really like, has a bit of everything, a bit of a climb, sharp descent, and a flat finish to hopefully get your sprint on. As usual, we'll have a quick look at the courses. We'll compare the teams quickly before we get into the action. Use the chapter descriptions below to jump around to the bits of the video that you want to see, but hopefully this should be a good one all the way through. So, let's get ready to rumble! We were surprised when we saw that the Coalition S-Wings wanted to race on the Surrey Hills course. No, in fact, we're more like...
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious!
This is one hilly course, and while we're not doing all of it, we are climbing up Fox Hill as part of the lead-in, and that doesn't even show on this course profile, by the way. And then we climb up Leith Hill. In total, around 415 meters of elevation, which is a lot for a club ladder race. The Fox Hill and Leith Hill climbs are of course the highlights, and where the separation, if any, will take place. It is worth pointing out that the Leith Hill climb is much longer than what the com indicates. By the time you reach the start of the com, you have already climbed for almost 4 kilometers up around 115 meters. Also, the gradients are misleading, as both climbs have some very steep sections.
This shit is steep.
In total, this parkour should take around 30 minutes, give or take a few, depending on how hard you push. Now, let's have a look at how the teams stack up for this first exciting fight. In the blue corner, we have proper Vikings, hailing from Sweden. I present Team Swedish Zwifters Bifrost. In the red corner, from, well, all over the place, we have Coalition S-Wings. Looking at 20-minute watts per kilo on Zwift power, it is clear the Coalition S-Wings seem to have the edge with the top 3 riders. And looking at 15-second power, the picture is similar. However, when you look at the VELO ratings on the Zwift racing app, which, as you know by now if you watched any of my videos, I find to be a much more accurate predictor of race outcomes, then the picture here is much more even. In fact, our team actually have the 2 highest ranked riders here. Prior to the race, the Coalition S-Wings kindly sent over an adjustment VELO score to us, which I found interesting, and I tried to understand what they had done before I created my own version of this. If we have a look at my profile on the Zwift racing app, we can see that there is a section called Terrain Handicaps. And I have tried to determine exactly how this is generated, but the explanation on the website is a bit vague. But in summary, it shows you how to adjust your VELO score based on the course you will race on. And in my case, I should do better on flat courses compared to rolly, hilly or mountainous courses. And at first that made sense to me as I am a somewhat heavier rider, but as we will see on the next slide, I'm a bit stumped just how this is calculated. On this slide, I have taken the original VELO scores and then added the terrain adjustment factor for each rider for this race. I have then calculated the adjusted VELO score and then shown the riders in the new predicted finish order. Now, not too much have changed here, but it has actually evened out the picture somewhat between the two teams based on VELO score rankings. Now, if the adjustment was solely based on my weight, my adjustment of -10 perhaps would have made sense. However, my teammate Brian is over 10 kilos lighter than me, and he got a much larger negative adjustment to his ranking. So again, I'm a bit perplexed just how this works. But who am I to argue with the experts? In summary, based on this data, this should be a relatively even race. Now, let's jump into the action and
Let's race.
as we roll off the start line, we can once again see that I had connection issues at the start of the race. This is the second time now, but I still have no clue what caused it, as my connection with Zwift is usually very solid. Perhaps the kids started downloading something upstairs.
That stops now.
Well, that mental command must have worked, since the connection stabilized and I could see where everyone was again. We are now on the Fox Hill climb, and just a quick comment on tactics for today. To be honest, given the parkour, there wasn't too much tactics to employ really. If you can drop people on the first climb, then you just keep going, hopefully with a teammate or two with you. Otherwise, you try to do the same on the second climb. For me personally, I wanted to wait a bit and see what happened. And as we can see from the footage, my teammate Brian, who's a very strong rider generally, and especially going uphill, decides to go for it and pushes away with a significant effort. I stayed with the group, but after a while, as I started to feel the effort, I decided to see if I could push away. If I got a gap, then I would try my best to bridge to Brian, as I thought he couldn't keep his pace up, and then we could work together for the rest of the race. If I couldn't bridge to Brian, but I still had the gap on the rest, I would just plug on and see what happened. And finally, if I felt like I was dragging the group with me, then I would stop my effort so Brian could hopefully go away solo. It turned out that I did get a gap, and that I was ultimately able to bridge to Brian, who I think was starting to feel his effort towards the end of Fox Hill. Once I caught up with him, we started taking turns, and we maintained about a 12-second gap until we reached the start of Leith Hill. To be fair to the rest of the riders, they must have pushed hard, because once that gap got to around 12 seconds, it didn't extend further. So again, they must have been working hard behind to catch us up. We now skip to the start of Leith Hill, and I don't mean the start of the actual KOM, rather the start of the climb, which commences some 4 kilometers earlier. Brian and I had worked together on the descent and the short flat section before Leith Hill, and as mentioned, the gap was still around 12 seconds or so to the rest of the riders, who were also all together at this point. As we speed up the footage here, we can see that Brian and I push pretty hard, taking turns, and slowly the gap starts to grow, initially just by a few seconds, but then with around 3.5 kilometers left, it has grown to almost 30 seconds. At this point, I mentioned to Brian that we can probably slow down somewhat, as I think the gap is likely big enough that we will not be caught by the rest of the riders. And since we had another club ladder race the next day, actually the race I will cover right after this one, I thought it may be a good idea to rest our legs as much as possible. But Brian is a racer, and he wanted to continue, so we did raise up the rest of the climb. I decided to sit in for a little bit, but then I started to put down some more power, and I must have had slightly better legs than Brian on the day as I slowly started pulling away. I can also see from the figures on the right that both of my teammates, Jan and Kalle, are also starting to pull away from the opposition, which was a fantastic effort on their part. I keep pushing, and as I get to the top of the climb, I have around a 15-second gap. From there, I coast the last kilometer or so, while I'm looking at both how Jan and Kalle keep pulling away from the opposition. I roll across the line in first, probably my easiest last kilometer I've had in a race in Zwift, and then I wait for the rest to cross the line. With that, let's have a look at the final results. This was clearly a good day for Swedish Swifters Bifrost, as we took the 4 top spots, with the Coalition S-Wing riders coming 5th, 6th and 7th. I am happy with my own performance. I felt strong on the day and had a bit left in the tank at the end. If I would have kept pushing in the last kilometer or so, I think I may have broken my 20-minute power record, but that will have to wait for another day. However, I think kudos should really go to Brian for animating the race on the climb up Fox Hill. His initial aggressive move won us the race, I believe, and we worked well together to ensure 1st and 2nd spot. But probably the best performances, in my opinion, goes to Jan and Kalle. They were really strong in the second part of the race and kept fighting, although it was clear we were going to win the overall match. So chapeau to you both. And finally, I thought the Coalition S-Wings worked hard also and kept pushing to the end. I know from experience that it's never easy to do so when you know you've lost the race, but they kept going, so I tip my hat to you for that. Okay, Swedish Swifters Bifrost won this one, but what about the next bout? This one against some wannabe Vikings from Norway. Okay, let's jump straight into the team presentations before we look at the course quickly and then commence the second bout of this show. In the blue corner, we have proper Vikings hailing from Sweden. I present Team Swedish Swifters Bifrost. In the red corner, from Norway, the wannabe Vikings, Valgrind. For this comparison, I thought I'd only look at the VELO scores from the Zwift racing app. For some reason, this race didn't show up either in Zwift Power under signups, nor on the Zwift racing app under scheduled events. So I had to put this together manually, thus apologies for the formatting here. If anybody knows why some club ladder races show and some don't, please let me know in the comments below. I'm curious whether it has something to do with how you sign up or something. Looking at the unadjusted scores on the left, we can see that the Swedish Swifters Bifrost have the advantage with the top 3 ranked riders. However, looking at the adjusted score for a rolling course, the picture is quite different, and I would say that it indicates again that this should be an evenly matched race. Now, a quick look at today's course, the Mayan San Remo. This relatively new course is another one of my favorites in Zwift, and I think another excellent club ladder course. At just over 20 kilometers long, taking roughly 30 minutes or so, 220 meters of climbing, and some steep descents, it has a bit of everything going for it. It starts with a long descent after a very short lead-in, then a few bumps, before 2 climbs that come back to back. Then you shoot down the grade before a 3-kilometer flat portion before the finish. While there are opportunities to try team tactics over the whole course in my opinion, the key is, as usual, the climbs. These climbs are both quite draftable, so it is harder to get away than on, say, the Surrey hill course we saw earlier, but there are steep sections, and they are also long enough that stronger riders should be able to get a gap if they have a good day. And once over the top of the climbs, you can either try to extend your lead, especially as a heavier rider going down the grade, but equally, this can also be a spot to gain some seconds back on the riders in front. Finally, there's a flat section where you can either try to hold off the pursuers and go long for the finish, or try your luck in a bunch sprint. All in all, a really cool course, I think. Now, let's roll the action and see how this fight went.
Let's race.
As we roll off the start line, the wannabe Vikings from Valgrind. That is a mouthful. I think I'll refer to them as just Valgrind going forward. Hit the accelerator button right away. It takes us a little while to catch them up, but then the race settles down. And that gives us a bit of time to discuss our tactics for this race. Our plan was to match their attacks, if any, until we got to the first of the 2 climbs. Then we planned on going reasonably hard, but not really to the point of trying to get away, rather just make it a hard effort for everybody in the race. On the second climb, however, the plan was to try to get some of our riders away with a significant effort towards the end of the second climb, where the gradients are steeper. Hopefully, we could then get a gap with 1 or 2 more riders, and that would set us up well for the descent down the grade and the final finish. We were quite hopeful this plan would work out, as we felt that overall we had slightly better climbing numbers. But, as always, a plan is only good until the race starts, and as you will see, it didn't quite plan out the way we wanted. We have now skipped ahead to the start of the first climb, as nothing of major note happened on the descent and then the slight bumps that followed. Well, apart from the fact that one of the Valgrind riders fell behind and ultimately DNF'd the race. Initially, when we saw him fall behind, we actually started pushing to make sure he didn't get back on, but we quickly realized that he must have had some sort of mechanical or connection issue, so we quickly knocked off that effort. I will speed up the action here on the first climb so we can see how we get on. Initially, we take up the lead at a reasonably hard pace as planned, but Valgrind go to the front and start pushing the pace harder. Then it was just a case of hanging on and making sure that we didn't lose any riders. While there were some gaps opening up as we went up the hill, we were pretty much all together as we got to the top of the first climb. We are now approaching the start of the second climb, and one of our riders, Hakan, starts to roll off the front a bit. That forces a bit of a reaction from Valgrind, and that in turn increased the pace for all of the riders. I try to rest on the small downhills at the beginning of the climb as I get ready for a significant effort coming up shortly. The pace stays honest, and I put in a bit of a dig with just over 2 kilometers to the top of the climb, more just to see the reaction of Valgrind than a serious push. I can see that one rider, Christopher, immediately covers, so I knock it off for now. We then go reasonably hard for the next kilometer or so before I throw in my attack with around 1.5 kilometers to the top. I thought that would allow me to go hard all the way to the top of the climb, but also to the start of the descent down the grade, and hopefully I'd be able to get a few seconds on the Valgrind riders. I quite quickly get a small gap, but all of the Valgrind riders work hard and cover my attack. I take a quick breather with around 900 meters to go, but then I go again with around 600 meters to go, and this time only Christopher seemed to be able to cover, and we get a gap of a few seconds to the rest of the riders. In hindsight, I made a bit of a mistake here as I did knock off my effort slightly at the top of the climb. I was of course tired at this point, but I think I could have pushed hard for another minute or so, and then the lead may have been a bit more than 5 seconds as we start going down the grade. I put in a sprint at the top of the grade to gather some speed before I get some well-earned rest. Looking back at the footage, I see Christopher made exactly the same move, and therefore I didn't really go away from him down the grade. However, my teammate Hakan must have used an illegal anchor power-up or something as he shoots by me and Christopher towards the bottom of the grade. Good job, Hakan. I honestly didn't think people would catch me up as easily here, as I'm reasonably heavy myself, and I gathered pretty good speed at the start. Hakan puts down the power and goes off the front. I start making a serious mistake here by closing the gap, but I quickly get shouted at my teammates on Discord, correctly so, to let Valgrind chase, and Hakan quickly starts to develop a bit of a gap. I just tried to draft behind Christopher at this point and cover any attacks, and this also allows a few more riders to catch up to us. At this point, we only have around 2 kilometers left of the race, and the pace stays reasonably calm, and Hakan continues to build his gap. I think he hits 13 seconds at one point. At around 800 meters, I then make another major mistake. A real knucklehead move, it turns out. I glance at Hakan's gap, and I figured that with only 800 meters to go and a 9-second gap, he should be able to easily win the race. So, I decided to go long to try to get second place. I knew that some of the Valgrind riders were good sprinters, so I thought I'd catch them off guard, and hopefully I could get second or at least third. However, what I didn't realize was how fast I would catch Hakan, who must have been tired from his solo effort. And as I see him appear ahead of me, I shout at him to kick. He rightfully shouts back saying, "What the F are you doing closing me down?" But at that point I'm already pushing past him for the line. I don't have quite the legs to see it through, and Christopher, who had gotten on my wheel, is stronger and wins the race, and I come second. I immediately apologize to Hakan, as it is likely that if I hadn't made that effort, he would have won the race.
Man, I am sorry. I am so sorry.
Perhaps Valgrind would have tried a long effort, but looking back at the footage, I don't think so, so that one is squarely on me. However, I am saved, at least somewhat, by the fact that we won the overall contest, which is the main thing. So, let's have a look at the final results. Christopher takes the win after a strong sprint. I finish second and Magnus third. Hakan finishes fourth, with the rest of the riders coming in a few seconds later. We win the overall match, but I'm sure that Valgrind would like a rematch when they have 5 riders and one doesn't have to DNF due to a likely technical issue. I must say I really enjoyed this race, and I keep learning about myself as a Zwift rider. For example, it turns out, who would have thought, that I climb reasonably well for a heavier rider, and my 5-minute effort is decent. But I better hit the gym for a better sprint, and I still have a massive amount to learn about tactics. I will end the video here. I hope you enjoyed these 2 club ladder matches, and if you did as well, then a like and a subscribe would be much appreciated. This is Sam, trying to spin to win on Zwift, and I will see you in the next one.